All right, everybody, welcome to our next video of Where Did the Book of Mormon Come From, part 16. I think this will be our final video in this series. I want to talk about, from the standpoint of looking at the evolutionary development of the Book of Mormon. Now, I'm actually using an article written by John C. Welch, who is an LDS scholar, and he called it Miraculous Translation of the Book of Mormon. And he talks about three main things. He talks about when was the Book of Mormon translated, how long the translation process take, where to place the translation, and key events of Joseph Smith's life. So what I want to say is this, that he is coming at it from the standpoint of a pro LDS view that because the Book of Mormon is so complex and that it took only a matter of days, several days he would say about 70 days or so of translating the book, that it must be miraculous that it came from God. But as we will examine, we can. I want to use the evidence, historical evidence that's found in the article, but also show you how it actually supports the evolutionary development of the Book of Mormon, as we will see. So I just want to bring that to your attention. Now, when we look at our timeline, I want us to think about that this occurred in September 1827, where Joseph Smith obtains the golden plates from the angel Moroni. Now, what's interesting to me is when you look at Sidney Rigdon's life, in which we have Mr. Charles Shook's book, The True Origin of the Book of Mormon, and also the Spalding Enigma, written by Cowardry and two other authors. They both give a detailed timeline of Rigdon's life, and they say, listen, there's a gap here. We don't know. His whereabouts are unknown from September 17th to October 8th, 1827. So that can synchronize with our hypothesis that he was able to give the edited manuscript to Joseph Smith. And then there's Joseph and Emma, who moved to Harmony, Pennsylvania in December of 1827. So I just want to show you an idea of where that is located on the map there. And then we have Martin Harris. He visits Professor Anthon in February of 1828. Joseph Smith had given him some characters that he had written down on to show the professors. Now, what's interesting is if you'll read Mr. Anthon's testimony about this, I think it's very interesting, but we're not going to talk about it right now. I just want to show you that happened in February 1828. Then April 12th to June 14th, 1828, the translation of the Book of Mormon commences with Martin Harris as the scribe, and they were 64 days into it, and they had done about 116 pages. Now, what's interesting to me is just a couple months prior to the translation, we know if our hypothesis is correct, Regan had already delivered that to him in September of 1827. So he couldn't put new truths in it. And what's interesting to me is Rigdon had learned the truth about baptism for remission of sins from Walter Scott. And let me say this: truth is discoverable. The Bible is 2,000 years old, and you can continue to learn that anyone can learn the truth from the Bible on how to be saved. And here in this religious context, we see that there were various men who were actually coming to the knowledge of the truth by studying what God's Word said. So I want to read what that proof of that Sidney Rigdon discovered this truth. So it says, Sidney Reagan was an orator of no inconsiderable abilities. In person, he was full, medium height, rotund. Sorry, I want to make that a little bit smaller if I might. Rotund form of countenance while speaking, open and winning with a little cast of melancholy. His action was graceful, his language copious, fluent in utterance, with articulation clear and musical. He was enthusiast and unstable. His personal influence with an audience was very great, but many with talents far inferior surpassed him in judgment and permanent power with the people. He was just the man for an awakening. He was an early reader of the Christian Baptists, admiring its strong progressive teaching. He circulated the paper and brought out its views in his sermons. Wherever he justly said of him after he had surrendered himself a victim and a leader of the Mormon delusion, it would scarcely be said just to deny sincerity and candor to him previous to the time when his bright star became permanently eclipsed under that dark cloud. In March 1828, he visited Walter Scott in Warren, Ohio. He had been with him on former occasions and adopted fully his method of preaching Christ and of calling the awakened and penitent believer to an immediate obedience of his faith for the remission of sins. The missing link between Christ and convicted sinners seemed now happily supplied by the restoration of the way of bringing converts into the knowledge of the pardon, which was established by Christ himself in the commission. Rigdon was transported with this discovery. Now, here, I want to say this, that even for 1,500 years, baptism was understood as an essential step in the salvation process. You can read early church fathers, you can read even those in the Reformation movement. So it's very interesting to me that, human beings are finite. And people think, they might get this wrong idea. Oh, I've discovered something that no one else has ever done before. Well, that's kind of, I don't want to say. I mean, it's. I guess it's arrogant to think that you've thought of something that no one else has ever done before. So it's going to be the case that we are going to discover truth. So I just want us to recognize that. And here, Walter Scott and Sidney Reagan, they did discover the truth about baptism for remission of sins, which is found, Acts 2, verse 38. It's pretty clear. Just to let y'all know about that. And that's found in the Hayden book, Early History of the Disciples on the Western Reserve. Okay, so what we see here in stage 1, what I believe would have been the original manuscript, is you have First Nephi, then you have some unknown Spalding Rigdon edited material, then you have Mosiah, Amma, Helaman, Third Nephi, Fourth Nephi, Mormon, Ether, and I believe that was probably the complete book at that time. Now, I say that because when you look at the book of Ether, it is mentioned in Mosiah and Amma. When you look at Mosiah and Amma and Helaman, definitely, and Mormon, and most of the books mentioned on there, I believe, have a lot of Spalding material in them. So it's very interesting to me what's there and how Rigdon added his theological views and some scriptures to that. Okay. So there was a tragedy that Joseph Smith, he lost his first child June 15, 1828, and Martin Harris had lost 116 pages that they had been translating. Now, what's interesting to me is Rigdon's whereabouts are unknown during this time. He had baptized H. Clapp, as you can see, in Mentor, Ohio, June 1828. And then August 29th to the 31st of 1828, he appeared at the Mahoning Baptist Association at Warren, Ohio. And so there's this gap that he could have been somewhere else for possibly 2 months. So I just want to bring that out. So what happened after these 116 pages? And my hypothesis would be that you got First Nephi, then those 116 pages missing, and then you got Mosiah. So that's what its status of what it looked like after June 1828. Now, you might be asking, well, why do I think the status of the edited manuscript looked like that after the loss of 116 pages? And I base this on 3 reasons. 1, Henry Lake's testimony. 2, Henry Lake's detail he makes in his testimony. And 3, Joseph Smith, he actually starts from the beginning of Mosiah, which is called the Mosiah priority, which even most LDS scholars agree with. So we'll talk about that in a moment. We'll talk about that, how that relates to the evolutionary development of the Book of Mormon. So here's what Henry Lake had said, and he said, one time when he was reading to me the tragic account of Laban, I pointed out to him what I considered an inconsistency, which he promised to correct. Referring to the Book of Mormon, I find to my surprise that it stands there just as he read it to me then. Some months ago I borrowed the Golden Bible, put it into my pocket, carried it home, and thought no more of it. About a week after, my wife found the book in my coat pocket as it hung up and commenced reading it aloud as I laid upon the bed. She had not read 20 minutes, so I was astonished to find the same passages in it that Spaulding had read to me more than 20 years before from his manuscript found. Since that, I have more fully examined the said Golden Bible and have no hesitation in saying that the historical part of it, principally, if not wholly taken from the manuscript found, I well recollect telling Mr. Spaulding that the so frequent use of the words "and it came to pass, now it came to pass" rendered it ridiculous. Spaulding left here in 1812, and I furnished him the means to carry him to Pittsburgh, where he said he would get the book printed and pay me. But I never heard any more from him or his writings till I saw them in the Book of Mormon. Henry Lake. Now, what's interesting is he says, Robert Patterson Jr. says, it should be stated in explanation of the above that the Book of Mormon at the time of its publication was frequently spoken of as the Golden Bible. Also, that an incongruity occurs in the story of Laban in the first book of Nephi, where Nephi says, they did speak many hard words unto us, their younger brothers, and they did smite us even with a rod. Whereupon an angel appears and says, why do you smite your younger brother with a rod? Consistency would require that the number, whether plural or singular, should be the same in both senses. The oversight is in itself a trifle, but its occurrence in both the Spaulding manuscript and the Book of Mormon is an answerable proof of identity. And I would agree with that. Now, what's interesting to me is, so we know that Joseph, someone had to go fetch Sidney Rigdon and tell him about what happened to the loss of pages of the manuscript. So that's why we have that first gap there mentioned for about 2 months. But then what's interesting is when you go even, you have to ask yourself this question. So somehow they're going to have to replace those lost pages, those lost 116 pages. So the question comes about is, could Sidney Rigdon had the time to do that replacement of pages? And so what's interesting to me is that Rigdon's whereabouts are unknown for 79 days. I mean, we have September 7th, 1828, the marriage of Dill and Kent. September 18th, 1828, the marriage of Corning and Wilson. October 13th, 1828, above marriage is recorded. But then there's nothing really, it's blank until January 1st, 1829, marriage of Churchill and Fosdick. So this could synchronize, maybe a very strong possibility of him working on that manuscript of replacing it during this time. Now, so this is from about July 15, 1828 to about December 31st, 1828. So was Rigdon capable of re-editing the pages and replacing the pages in that amount of time, 6 months or so? Not only is he's going to not replace not only the 116 pages, but he's going to add to some of those pages from 3rd Nephi, even all the way to Ether, and of course add Moroni. So if we look back at this, I just want to say this once more. So, so he had lost the pages, right? And then, so the gift of translation is taken away. And then we probably have Rigdon during that 79 days probably trying to do the replacement pages and edit it again. And because he learned new theological truths, he could add that into the Book of Mormon. Then September 22nd, 1828, Joseph Smith again obtains plates and interpreters. Now, my hypothesis is that this probably is not correct. That's where I think that that it's just not correct. So that's just my opinion on that matter. He probably had to have more time to do it. March 1829, we do know that a few pages have been translated and inscribed for Emma Smith, his wife, and Samuel Smith, his brother. And Martin Harris, he had visited Joseph Smith from Palmyra. And then on April 7, 1829 to late June of 1829, there was a translation of the Book of Mormon commenced with Oliver Cowdery serving as the scribe this time. Now, what's really interesting to me is Rigdon's whereabouts are unknown from July 6 to August 6 of 1829, about a 1 month and a half. So, could it possibly be that he brought more pages, or did he help with editing the translation process? We don't know, but that's just something that needs to be thought about. Now, I want to zoom in a little bit more on this translation process. So this would be stage 3. So we got stage 2 of what happened after June 1828. So stage 3, he's got to replace 116 pages, but also what in the blue part, either it's the case that Joseph Smith kept these books and they still contain the Baptist theology of Rigdon on salvation, Mosiah, Alma, Helaman, and it might be the case that the purple books there, 1st Nephi, 3rd Nephi, 4th Nephi, Mormon, and Ether, Rigdon takes these home and re-edits them by adding theological truths he had discovered. So if you look at April 7, 1829, Mosiah 2, so this comes from Welch's article, and these are estimates here, so just to let everyone know this here, not concrete. Now, there's some historical events that are clearly indicated. They're found in his article. I didn't make mention of them in this presentation. April 9th, 1829, Doctrine and Covenants 8 received, directed to Oliver Cowdery about the power to translate. And, you could think about that's a good catalyst for Mosiah 8 through 11. So they keep on translating. They probably translated Mosiah 29 and Alma 1 and 2, April 14th, 1829. And then going a little bit further, we got Alma chapter 39 through 40. And that would have been April 26, 1829, Doctrine and Covenants 9. They probably received, because if you look at 9:14 with Alma 40:23, seems to be a connection there. Alma 62 and 63, probably translated on May 4th, 1829. And then you get 3rd Nephi 1 through 3, where Rigdon starts to, Rigdon had inserted some new theological truths into that. So May 10th, 1829. So the question is, did Rigdon at some point before May 10th, 1829, able to re-deliver the edited Spalding manuscript with the replacement pages? And I think that is so when we look at that unknown whereabouts of 79 days. Just let everyone remember that. All right, then 3rd Nephi 16 through 18, May 15th, 1829, the restoration of Aaronic priesthood, 3rd Nephi 11 and chapter 12. 3rd Nephi 28 through 30, 4th Nephi, May 21st, 1829, received Doctrine and Covenants chapter 7, which has to do with John. And 3rd Nephi deals with, whether those on three Nephites are going to live onward. What about John? So it was an interesting thing. And I can't get into that much because I'll get into maybe a little bit of that later on with the 3 Nephites. And then there's Ether 1 through 3, May 25th, 1829. You got Samuel Smith, who was baptized, and that's a strong historical key event that occurred. Moroni 9 and 10, the title page is completed. Now notice that May 31st, 1829, Doctrine and Covenants 11 was received. So June 1st, 1829, Joseph Smith and Oliver Cowdery went from Harmony, Pennsylvania to Fayette, New York. And then they started to translate the replacement pages. So 1st Nephi 1 and 2, June 5th, 1829, translation resumes. So by, Joseph Smith had already received the edited manuscript by Rigdon concerning the replacement pages. So, and we'll talk a lot more about that in just a moment. Some interesting, important details concerning that. So Joseph Smith keeps these. Now, I don't know if Joseph Smith kept those books of Mosiah, Alma, Helaman. or Rigdon took them also. He took everything. That may explain why. I mean, it explains why the power of translation was taken away from him, because he didn't have any books that he could, manuscripts he could translate, from. So I don't know. It's just a possibility there. And then Rigdon replaces the lost pages by also adding new theological truths and filler material, and we're going to see that. We see that in the book of Moroni. We see it in 3rd, 4th Nephi and Mormon and Ether, the truth about baptism, remission of sins. And then June 21st, 1829, interesting enough, it quotes from 3rd Nephi and Moroni, showing that it must have been done before that time. 2nd Nephi 32 and 33, June 23rd, 1829. 2nd Nephi 29 talks about the 3 witnesses, so it was a catalyst for that. And Jacob 1 through 7 probably was translated June 24th to 26, 1829. And then Enos, Jerome, Omni, and Words of Mormon. Now, what's interesting to me is those books contain like several hundred years. So it seems like that Rigdon had to rush so that he could get to King Benjamin's reign near the beginning of Mosiah. And then June 29th, 1829 in Manchester, New York. And then June 30th, 1829, by this time the translation was finished. So Welch, he proposed that it took 53 days to translate Mosiah through Moroni. And from 1st Nephi through the Words of Mormon took 21 days, so a total of 73 days. Now he would propose and say, see, it's miraculous. It came from God. Here's something I want us to think about. So there are several passages in what we would call stage 3 where it does contain the Baptist theological views of Rigdon on salvation. And I would urge you to read those passages for yourself. Now, what's interesting to me is 3 Nephi 1:23 actually contains a combination of, it says, baptized unto repentance for the remission of sins. But what's interesting to me is chapter 7, verse 25 and 26. And this is, to me, is the clincher when you think about it, because it still contains something that of what Rigdon once believed. So, and he probably hastily maybe read over it. I don't know why. So it says, and it'll be very interesting if the Mormon Church does change this in the Book of Mormon. But I just want to read verse 25. Therefore they were ordained of Nephi men unto this ministry, that all such as should come unto them should be baptized with water, and this as a witness and a testimony for God and unto the people. Now notice this, that they had repented and received a remission of their sins. See, they had already received remission of sins, and then they're being baptized. Well, the Bible says that we're to repent and be baptized in order to obtain the remission of sins. So, but you can look at that yourself and see that. So when stage 4 came along, we see it is the case, and you're welcome to look at these, that Rigdon actually inserted in 3rd Nephi, 4 Nephi, Mormon, Ether, Moroni, even 2nd Nephi, the truth about baptism for the remission of sins. So very interesting. So here's the thing. Here's the main point I want you to think about. The book, all right, even if this theory falls short, and there are some weaknesses to it, but the Book of Mormon still is false. Because it contains a contradictory view on baptism. See, the truth does not contradict itself, but that's what we see in the Book of Mormon, and that's why it shows me that it's for man. Now, so Rigdon now starts with 1st Nephi and reworks the lost 116 pages by doing a lot of filler material. He must connect the timeline from 1st Nephi to the reign of King Benjamin, which is toward the beginning of Mosiah. The group came up with the small plates of Nephi, which was mentioned in 3rd Nephi, re-edited by Rigdon, mentioned nowhere else except in the small plate section, which covers from First Nephi to Omni. And then the Words of Mormon is where Mormon discovers the small plates and incorporates them into his abridgment. Now, Rigdon does rework First Nephi. He doesn't really have to touch First Nephi 1 through 7. He writes in the apocalyptic style, definitely has allusions to Revelation in chapters 8 through 15. There's the prophecy of the future of America. He even mentions Christopher Columbus. But there's he talks about the corruption of the scriptures, which to me is even Muslims will say that the Bible has been translated, it's been corrupted. And it's because we do know that there is this tension between the Book of Mormon and the Bible, between the Quran and the Bible. You got to believe one or the other. You got to believe the Bible, or if you're a Muslim, you believe the Quran. If you're a Mormon, you believe the Book of Mormon. And so, but if you look at the evidence of the early transmission of the scriptures, there's no fundamental doctrine that's been changed. So that shows you that this claim is false, and therefore the Book of Mormon is false. And then you got filler material like 1 Nephi 20:21 from Isaiah. My hypothesis is that he wrote the whole book of 2 Nephi. And what's interesting is 2 Nephi 3 is a prophecy of Joseph Smith and the spokesman. Well, who's the spokesman? Well, he's identified later on in Doctrine and Covenants as Sidney Rigdon. So I think that's kind of interesting. So when he was going back through this, replacing lost pages, he decided to add a prophecy of himself and Joseph Smith into it. Chapter 27, remember we were going to come back to this. In February 1828, Martin Harris had visited Charles Anthon. Well, they decided to write that in to act as a prophecy. So that's one of the things that's also put in. Chapter 29 attacks the Bible. Chapter 9 and 31, of course, Rigdon mentions the truth about baptism for remission of sins there. Rigdon also came up with Jacob. He gives that longest parable ever made in chapter 5, about which definitely is from a mixture of Romans 11 and Luke 13 and so forth. And then he wrote Enos, Jerome, and Omni, which cover several hundred years so that he could finally, get up there to the reign of King Benjamin. And then the Words of Mormon used to tell how Mormon discovered the small plates. Then you got also the small plates are mentioned in these passages, very interesting enough. So if you remember, 3 Nephi 5:15 is the first time where since he was reworking that, he would have added that in there. But then he starts to add them into the section from 1 Nephi all the way to Omni. And so, he's got to repeatedly tell you, hey, these are the small plates, these are small plates, these are small plates. But they're nowhere mentioned after the Words of Mormon, nor before 3 Nephi. So I think that's kind of interesting. So if you take all this into consideration, you'll remember that his Baptist views are found from there in Mosiah and Helaman, and partially in 3 Nephi, I might say. And then mostly through 3 Nephi and 4 Nephi, Mormon and Ether, baptism and remission of sins is mentioned, and also Moroni. And then what's interesting is in 2 Nephi, baptism and remission of sins is mentioned. So I find that, the Mosiah priority that, it began with Mosiah, him and Oliver Cowdery. And then he, wrote, they translated all that. And then they went back and they translated 1 Nephi all the way to Words of Mormon so that they can get back to the reign of King Benjamin. So you got the small record mentioned in 3 Nephi. You got the small plates mentioned throughout from 1 Nephi on to Omni. But what's interesting to me is you don't find it between 3 Nephi and, Mosiah, Alma, and Helaman, especially Alma. It's 63 chapters long. It's over 100 pages long, but it does not mention those small plates. So I think you can see here This is the evolutionary development of the Book of Mormon. That's all I'm trying to say here. That it is human oriented. And I believe that probably the original purpose that Sidney Reagan did this was to introduce new scripture because, he had this wild, extravagant view of miracles and so forth. And so I don't, um, I don't think it's strange that he might have wanted to do that. But I think probably later on it was changed, unfortunately. Now, I want to examine the defense side. We want to look at what Sidney Rigdon said. I think that's very important. So, when Matilda Davidson, the former wife of Solomon Spalding, she wrote her testimony. It was printed in a newspaper. Well, Sidney Rigdon decided to respond to it. So he says, in your purpose of the 18th, I see a letter signed by somebody calling herself Matilda Davidson, pretending to give the origin of Mormonism as she is pleased to call it by relating a moonshine story about a certain Solomon Spalding, a creature with the knowledge of whose earthly existence I am entirely indebted to this production. For surely until Dr. Philastus Holbert informed me that such a being lived, and at some former period I had not the most distant knowledge of his existence. And I think that's kind of interesting the way he words that. I had not the most distant knowledge of his existence. So kind of you ask yourself, well, did you have a closer knowledge of his existence then? Because, you do have him and Solomon Spalding have the same post office. Their names are mentioned there on the list to come get your mail in Pittsburgh. So, and all I know that doesn't exactly, that's not a clincher, but just something for you to think about. And all I now know about his character is the opinion I formed from what is attributed to his wife in obtruding my name upon the public in the manner in which she said to have done it, by trying to make the public believe that I had knowledge of the ignorant and, according to her own testimony, the lying scribblings of her deceased husband. For if her testimony is to be credited, her pious husband in his lifetime wrote a bundle of lies for the righteous purpose of getting money. How many lies he had told for the same purpose while he was preaching, she had not so kindly informed us, but we are at liberty to draw our own conclusions. For he that would write lies to get money would also preach lies for the same object. This being the only information which I have, or even had, of this said Solomon Spalding, I of necessity have but a very light opinion of him as a gentleman, a scholar, or a man of piety. For had he been either, he certainly would have taught his pious wife not to lie nor unite herself with adulterers, liars, and the basis of mankind. It is only necessary to say, in relation to the whole story about Spalding's writings being in the hands of Mr. Patterson, who was in Pittsburgh. Now, the question is, which Mr. Patterson? Joseph Patterson or Robert Patterson? He doesn't tell us. And who is said to have kept a printing office, and my saying that I was concerned in said office is the most base of lies without even the shadow of truth. There was no man by the name of Patterson during my residence at Pittsburgh who had a printing office. What might have been before I lived there, I know not. Mr. Robert Patterson, I was told, had owned a printing office before I lived in that city. Okay, so he does mention Robert Patterson, but had been unfortunately in business, unfortunate in business, and failed before my residence there. This Mr. Patterson, who was a Presbyterian now notice says he before my residence there. Even though we know in 1816 at least, Rigdon did have he had mail going there. It wasn't until, I believe, 1822 that he was a preacher there at the First Baptist Church in Pittsburgh. But anyways, this Mr. Patterson, who was a Presbyterian preacher, I had a very slight acquaintance with during my residence in Pittsburgh. He was then acting under an agency in the book and stationery business, and was the owner of no property of any kind, printing office, or anything else during the time I resided in the city. If I were to say that I ever heard of the Reverend, they call him a Reverend, even though Reverend only is applied to God in the Psalms. And his hope of life until Dr. Philastus Scholastus Holbert rose lie about me, I should be a liar like unto themselves. Why was not the testimony of Mr. Patterson obtained to give force to this shameful tale of lies? The only reason is that he was not a fit tool for them to work with. He would not lie for them, for if he were called on, he would testify to what I have here said. Now, you'll have to go back through one of the lessons, but this is where Mr. McKee's valuable information sheds light about Joseph Patterson is the one whom Spaulding dealt with, not Robert. And why doesn't Rigdon bring up Joseph's name? I mean, it is R&J Patterson publishing firm, right? Let me hear, gentlemen, give a history of this Dr. Holbert and his associates who aided in getting up and propagating this batch of lies. I have seen and heard at one time and another by the persecutors and haters of the truth a great deal said about the eminent physician Dr. Holbert. I never thought the matter worthy of notice, nor probably ever should, had it not made its appearance in your paper or someone of equal respectability. And I believe, gentlemen, had you known the whole history of this budget of lies, it would never have found a place in your paper. But to my history, this said doctor was never a physician at any time, nor anything else but a base ruffian. He was the seventh son, and his parents called him Doctor. It was his name and not the title of his profession. He once belonged to the Methodist Church and was excluded for immoralities. He afterwards imposed himself on the Church of Latter-day Saints and was excluded for using obscene language to a young lady, a member of said church, who resented his insult with indignation which became both her character and profession. After his exclusion he swore, for he was vilely profane, that he would have revenge and commence his work. He soon found assistance a pious old deacon of the Campbellite church by the name of Onis Clapp and his two sons Thomas Clapp, Matthew Clapp, both Campbellite preachers, abetted and assisted by another Campbellite preacher by the name of Adamson Bentley. Holbert went to work catering lies for the company. Before Holbert got through, his conduct became so scandalous that the company utterly refused to let his name go out with the lies which he had collected and he and his associates had made, and they substituted the name of Edie Howe. The change, however, was not much better. There was scandalous immoralities about the Howe family of so black a character they had nothing to lose, and became good tools for this holy company to work with. A man of character would never put his name to a work which Holbert was concerned in. But while Holbert was busily employed in the service of the company, old Deacon Clapp was employed in taking care of his wife. How many others of the company aided in this business must be left to futurity to disclose. At a certain time, Holbert, being out till a late hour in the night, returned to his house, and in going to his bedroom where his wife was, behold and lo, there was the pious old deacon either in the bed with his wife or at the side of it. He had a $5 banknote in his hand, and his dress was rather light to suit the doctor's taste, for he was not quite as well off as was Aaron when he offered sacrifice, not even having on a pair of linen breeches. Holbert laid hold of him and called for help, which soon came to his assistance. The pious old deacon was arraigned before a justice of the peace and was on the eve of being bound over for his appearance to the county court, when, to put an end to the evils which might result from his pious care of Mr. Holbert, he kindly offered a yoke of oxen and $100. This was accepted. Holbert took his wife and left the country forthwith, and the pious old deacon and his sons and the good Mr. Bentley are left to wear out the shame of their great effort to destroy the character of innocent men whom they never dare meet in argument. The tale in your paper is one hatched up by this gang before the time of their explosion. It has always been a matter of no ordinary satisfaction to me to know that my enemies have no better weapon to use against me or the cause in which I am engaged than lies, for if they had any better they would certainly use them. I must confess, however, that there is some constancy in our persecutors, for as truth never can destroy truth, it would be in vain for our persecutors to use truth against us, for this would only build us up. This they seem to know, and laid hold of the only available means they have, which are lies. And this indeed is the only weapon which can be or ever has been used against the truth. As our persecutors are endeavoring to stop the progress of truth, I must confess that they act with a degree of consistency in the choice of the means, namely lies. But if truth would do it, they would surely not have recourse to lies. In order to give character to their lies, they dress them up with a great deal of piety. For a pious lie, has a good deal more influence with an ignorant people than a profane one. Hence their lies come signed by the pious wife of a pious deceased priest. However, his last act of piety seems to have been to write a bundle of lies, themselves being witnesses, but then his great piety sanctifies them, and lies become holy things in the hands of such excessive piety, particularly when they are graced within a few reverends. But the days have gone by when people are to be deceived by these false glossings of reverend sanctions. The intelligent part of the communities of all parts of the country know that reverends are not more notorious for truth than their neighbors. The only reason why I'm assailed by lies is that my opposers dare not adventure on argument. Know that if they do, they fail. They try, therefore, to keep the public from investigating by publishing and circulating falsehoods. This I consider a high encomium on both myself and the cause I defend. Respectfully, Sidney Rigdon. So, I want to ask you some questions before we go on. Why did Sidney Reagan have so many conflicts with Joseph Smith through the 14-year period of 1830 to 1844? They were kind of like in a seesaw power struggle, you could say. When Smith died, why did Rigdon threaten to expose the secrets of the church, if there aren't any secrets to divulge? Why did Rigdon want all of his papers destroyed before he died? What did he have to hide? I believe you can find that in the biography of Sidney Rigdon. Don't remember his name right now. Who wrote that? Sidney Rigdon. Now, here's the interesting thing. Even Sidney Rigdon's son, John Rigdon, wrote, said, I think John Rigdon was talking to his mother and asking her, did Father tell him the truth, that the Book of Mormon really came from God? And she said, yes, your father told you the truth. What's interesting is when we read the grandson, okay? So Sidney Rigdon's grandson, what does he say? Well, he says their family understood it to be a fraud. Isn't that interesting? In the intervals of my liberty labors here, I have many talks with men who were in Utah at a very early day, and occasionally with original Mormons or their sons, which would be interesting had I the time to detail them. But my chance talks with one of these are so agreeable that I report him briefly for you. Mr. Walter Sidney Rigdon is a citizen of Carrollton, Cattaraugus County, New York, and a grandson of Sidney Rigdon, the partner of Joe Smith. He talked with old Sidney hundreds of times about the scheme of the Golden Bible, and his father still has many of the old Sidney's documents. Grandfather was a religious crank, says Mr. Rigdon, until he lost money by it. He started in as a Baptist preacher and had a very fine congregation for those days in Pittsburgh. There was no reason at all for his leaving except that he got cracked. At the time he had no ideas of making money. Indeed, while he was with the Mormons, his chances to make money were good enough for most men, but he came out of it about as poor as he went in. But how did he change first? The interviewer asked. Well, he tried to understand the prophecies. The man who does that is sure to go crazy. He studied the prophets and baptism, and of course he got rattled. Daniel, Ezekiel, and Revelations will rattle any man who gives his own mind to them. At any rate, they did him, and he joined Alexander Campbell. Campbell then believed that the end of the world was nigh. His millennial harbinger shows that they rattled all who listened to them in Ohio and other places. Then grandfather got disgusted and decided on a new deal. He found Joe Smith, and they had a great many talks together before they brought out the plates. None of us ever doubted that they got the whole thing up. But father always maintained that grandfather helped get up the original Spalding book. At any rate, he got a copy very early and schemed on some way to make it useful. Although the family knew these facts, they refused to talk on the subject while grandfather lived. In fact, he and they took on a huge disgust at the whole subject. Grandfather died at Friendship, Allegheny County, New York in 1876, over 80 years old. His son Sidney, my father, was born at Mentor in 1827, remembers the stirring times of Mormonism. He lives where I do. Grandfather had preached to his old neighbors in Allegheny, taking converts to Nauvoo, so after the breakup in 1844, he returned to live at Friendship. For a while, he spoke of Mormonism as an attempt to improve Christianity, but the later phases of the things in Utah were totally different from what he had taught. His daughter, Nancy Rigdon, is now Mrs. Ellis of Pittsburgh, and her husband is a journalist in that city. Her testimony against Joseph Smith is very strong. The prophet was no doubt a thoroughly bad man. I only report that part of Mr. Reagan's talk, which shows the history of the Golden Bible, is accepted in the family. Of course, if Sidney Reagan had wanted the world to believe the Smith story of the plates, he would have told them so. But though the family do not care to ventilate it, he evidently taught them to treat the whole thing as a fraud. J. Hates Beadle. That was written in 1888. So, I mean, what family member would, if it wasn't true, talk about that? That's something that's so embarrassing. So where did the Book of Mormon come from? Come to this as we go through this final video. It's either from God or the Bible or the mere man. The cumulative case of circumstantial evidence points it to be from mere man. First, we got the witnesses from Solomon spotting the manuscript found that transformed it into the Book of Mormon. We got the witnesses of Solomon spotting the Sidney Rigdon. We got the witnesses of Sidney Rigdon's foreknowledge of the Book of Mormon. We got the witnesses of Sidney Rigdon to Joseph Smith. We got the contradiction of the Book of Mormon, like, you got the darkness, and you got the baptism, and you got the first parents, Adam and Eve, were beguiled when only Eve was actually beguiled, 1 Timothy 2. There is modern theological issues mentioned in the Book of Mormon, like universalism. You got the witnesses who testify about Joseph Smith's character, how he was a very person you can't really trust. You got the first vision contradictions. You got the Sidney Reagan and Joseph Smith's relationship. So what really is the best explanation for the Book of Mormon? Well, I would say to you that it came from mere man. Well, we have reached the end of our series, and I hope you've learned a lot. If you are a Latter-day Saint, I hope you will want to study with me so that you can become just a Christian. Don't join the man-made denominations that are out there. Be added to the one true church that's found in the Bible. That's what you can be a part of. If you're a Christian, I hope this has strengthened your faith and why we should not believe the Book of Mormon as the Word of God. Let us seek to only uphold the Bible as the only inspired Word of God. 1 Peter 3:15, 1 John 4:1. I really urge you to go to these websites here, especially if you're not a Christian. Search for truth.org. And we just want to help you in any way possible that we can. And I really appreciate you being with us. Truth is too precious. Eternity is too long. And I hope you will desire to come to the knowledge of the truth. Remember what Jesus says? You shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. We love you, care for you, and we do care about where you will spend eternity. So I hope you will reach out to us. I want to thank special thanks to SidneyReagan.com, Dale Broadhurst, Craig Criddle, and his team's research, MormonLeaks.com, and Calgary from the Spalding Enigma. I really appreciate being with all of you, and I hope that if you are a Latter-day Saint, please reach out. I mean that. And I really hope that you learn from this series. Thank you.